Greetings and welcome to Beatles Stuffology. We're two old friends sit about and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm alright. If my voice is sounding a little bassy today, it's because I'm stuck with a cold. I'm a bit congested, but I am fighting through it because it is Christmas time, and it's just one of those things.
I was going to ask if that was a euphemism for all the work parties that you've no doubt been going to.
Sorry, you seem to have mistaken me for somebody sociable.
So we are welcome to our Christmas episode. It's the 16th of December when this gets put out into the world, although to let daylight into magic, it's actually the 2nd of December when we're recording it. But yeah, we thought we would actually have a little bit of a lean into Christmas. We're not quite in the step into Christmas mode of Mr. John, but we're going to lean into Christmas a little bit. Because, believe it or not, the Beatles are synonymous with Christmas. Last year, no, it may have been last year, maybe the year before, we did talk about rating and reviewing all of the Beatles Christmas singles, and then we listened to them and decided that was a bit of a dead end. That they were nice and interesting, but it really wasn't enough for an episode. But actually, interest for me this year was kind of piqued by the brand new Amazon advert and the fact that the Beatles have come back to life in some people's eyes. With apparently they've released a single Now and Then, I think it's called.
Not familiar with it myself, but okay, I'll take your word for it.
Fair enough. And of course, the Beatles have a bit of a reputation as not being, and I think we may have spoken about this before, not necessarily being most forthcoming when it comes to licensing. But actually, it kind of feels like Apple are a little bit more inclined to do it than we might think. Of course, we have the Amazon advert using the Stone Cold classic future 9 or 10 out of 10 rating on this podcast, spoiler, In My Life, which is one, in my humble opinion, one of the great Beatles tracks. And it ends up being in an Amazon advert. Now, have you seen said advert?
Well, I have seen said advert because you sent it to me, and I hadn't seen it. I hadn't heard of it. I don't watch a lot of broadcast TV, which isn't trying to make any kind of point. I just kind of just
your face
done.
BBC license,
Absolutely. And so I was unaware of it until you brought it to my attention, and I think I'm correct in saying after I'd seen it, my reaction was, "What a piece of shit." Now, I think that's not an unfair summary of it. It's terrible. It's emotionally manipulative in the way that all Christmas adverts are. But so yeah, I have seen it. It's awful.
Okay, so you're very much going with the down with capitalism route here.
No, it's just a really shit cover version.
Well, no, but also in your, all Christmas adverts are emotionally manipulative. Of course they are, absolutely. But
that's what advertising is.
You are empowered. You can make your own choice. If you don't like Now and Then, it's okay to say so. Don't be put off by idiots on YouTube telling you must like it or else you're being disrespectful. Anyway, I think it is worth saying it is, what we're talking about here are not obviously the original versions of these songs being used, but they are, perhaps some twee acoustic covers at times. This is obviously designed to play up the sweet, sentimental side of it, which is a shame because I do think In My Life has a little bit of a tougher edge to it, which we'll get into when we talk about it in about 3 years' time. But it's far from being the only Beatles adjacent song, especially this year as well, because Apple has an advert that uses George Harrison's "Isn't It a Pity." Now, if you're going to be critical of major mega corporation being emotionally manipulative, then the use of "Isn't It a Pity," actually the George Harrison singing "Isn't It a Pity," I mean, that is kind of beyond emotionally manipulative, isn't it? It's just so kind of random. It's a this person's being a bully, so co-worker is going to work out why this person's being a bully and make him less sad, all through the power of Apple.
Worth saying Apple the computer company, not Apple the music label.
Oh yeah, sorry, yes, of course. For good point, well made. lest we get sued, because of course they're not. Neither of those corporations have a track record for pumping money into lawyers. Yeah, it's an odd one. I mean, it's very sweetly done. Both that and the Amazon advert are incredibly well done, but they are worryingly cynical in the way that they manipulate a message, and it kind of goes beyond. We have a lot of listeners in America, and you're not going to understand this reference, but I'll try and explain it. On BBC TV in the daytime, we have this program called Homes Under the Hammer. It's basically a show about buying property at auction and then flipping it. Yeah, quickly doing it up and then selling on, and they use references that are so on the point. So sort of think of an example. They might really go for something. If someone walks in, has a look at the house that they're buying, goes, "Ooh, it's a bit cold in here. I know what I'll do. I'll put a boiler in, and that will really heat it up." They might then start playing, I don't know, Disco Inferno or something. They're really on point with their references. And it feels like that's what they're trying to do here. And like, well, isn't it a pity? Isn't it a shame? Well, that we don't look after each other. So let's make an advert about that. And I think it's a bit of a shame, because if you go back there to 2008, when John Lewis over here used. John Lewis has become synonymous with their Christmas adverts and storytelling within it, but one of their early efforts was 2008, and it's a nice, simple little thing, an acoustic version of From Me to You. And it's basically just about the power of giving a gift, and obviously the subtext is it would really make people happy if you bought the gift from John Lewis.
Worth mentioning for our international audience, John Lewis is a department store.
Yeah, okay. And you kind of wonder whether or not we could have stayed with that sort of, because to me that's that. I know there's elements of cynicism in there, but there's no great narrative. It shows a wide range of people. It's nice and diverse and inclusive, and it's just meant to make you feel good about what's going on. And if there's anything that you want, if there's anything I can do, just call on me and I'll send it along with love from me to you. Just fits perfectly with that in a way that in my life doesn't quite work. But it's just a reminder, isn't it, that the Beatles, let's not be pious about it. I was watching the other day on TV Paul and Linda's appearance in The Simpsons, which was nothing more than a glorified advert for her vegetarian products. So it's not unlike them to do these kind of things. There was a little bit of a track record.
Well, and Mr. McCartney is not shy about making money in any circumstances at all. That's why he bought up vast tracts of other people's music catalogs. It's why he overinvested in shares, which was one of the contentious issues in the breakup, all that kind of stuff. So we definitely isn't something that we need to be too pious about. I think I'm correct in saying that John Lewis advert was the first time in the UK, at least, that any Beatles song was used in a commercial.
Okay, that's interesting. That is interesting. I don't know.
I'm willing to be corrected, but I'm reasonably sure.
John Lewis have had a couple more since then. There was a version of Golden Slumbers performed by Elbow, which I quite like, and it's a cute little advert about a boy, kind of it's a Michel Gondry produced directed advert, so it is open to slight interpretation, but there's a monster under the bed. Kid makes friends with it, he's up late, but all he really needs is a nightlight, and then he'll get some proper sleep, and that's fine. And then there's also another twee acoustic version of Real Love, which in itself is a bit of a twee acoustic, but never mind, let's not get into that. But they're not the only examples. In fact, I think those examples are at least, I'm going to say, relatively tasteful, and I would recommend listeners Google John Lewis Christmas adverts and then add in Golden Slumbers, Real Love from Me to You, and you can then have a look at what we mean. They're certainly an awful lot less cynical than Yoko Ono allowing footage of John Lennon talking to be used in a Citroen advert, for
Yeah,
example.
which is a really weird choice there. A lot of these Christmas adverts that you've been talking about, I only know through sort of YouTube either yourself or other people sort of pointing me to, because I lived
Yeah,
abroad at the time. They were like 2008. I was living in the Netherlands, so I never saw any of these at all. So for me, they're very kind of context free. I never really ended up listening to them or watching them at Christmas. It's, it could be July. So, oh, have you seen this? Oh, right enough. So a lot of them passed me by. But that Citron one is just, it's just such a weird choice, and she can't need the money. So
no,
what is the? I don't understand what the motivation is. Like if it had been, even if it like if it, say it had been Olivia with George. Like George was a noted lover of cars. Like he was a big Formula One fan. Like at least you
but
could say like
Citroen,
this. Yeah, all right, sure. But Citra. But at least you could like say there was like a tangential
yeah, yeah,
connection or
yeah.
something. But Lennon, I I I don't. I've never understood that one. It's baffling to me.
Well, it's a long way from being the worst one, I would
Oh
say,
yeah,
and
for
I mean
sure.
worst pejoratively. Pejoratively, did I mean that? I don't know. Anyway, straight down the line, absolutely worse. Because the worst one I've seen by some way is an advert that Ringo made, where he's sitting behind his drums waiting for the band to turn up. They've all been in touch. They're all coming back. Excuse me. And the joke is that actually it's various members of the Monkees, and it's an advert for Pizza Hut. So, you've got the Monkees, and at some point, maybe this episode, next episode, I am gonna weave a bit of Mickey Dolenz in, but you've got the Monkees turning up. So you could argue that they're a cut price Beatles, and they're advertising Pizza Hut, which, let's face it, is kind of like a lower class kind of pizza sort of thing. Yes, Pizza Hut, sue me. You're not as good as some of the better pizza makers around there.
Can we not encourage people to be litigious towards us, please?
Well, you can't sue me for having an opinion. I don't think they're going to lose earnings as a result. I don't think our enormous listenership, dear listener, are suddenly going to go, oh, I know, Andrew on that Beatles podcast said Pizza Hut's a bit rubbish, therefore I'm not going to go there anymore. But that's fine. But I do think it's interesting how so many of these adverts, these Christmas adverts, use this kind of twee acoustic versions of songs, and I sort of feel like it's an extension of something that started in well, I think the mid 90s over here with a sort of ironic bossa nova cover craze, and also bands like the Mike Flowers Pops
Oh yeah,
and led to
Wonderwall and
groups
all
like
that.
Hayseed Dixie in America, who are great fun. However, it is kind of like a one note joke that stops being funny after a while. Um, but it's interesting because I talk a lot about, the fact that the Beatles, when they cover a song, they tend to do straight covers, most of the time anyway. And at least some of these are a little bit more radical. Doesn't mean you have to like them, but it is a little bit more radical. And hey, folks, we might talk about that in the next episode, which is about Buddy Holly's Words of Love. Spoiler. Anyway, okay, I've had my say. Merry Christmas, everyone. Mistletoe and wine, children singing Christian rhyme, and all of that. Yeah, can we make a direct link to 8 days a week? Christmas week feels like it's got 8 days and not seven. Woohoo!
Oh, brilliant! That was no. I wonder whether you wrote that in advance or whether that was just off the cuff. It's very
No, I
hard to
didn't
tell.
actually. That's what I
No,
didn't.
I really didn't think you had. So, I
Ah,
trust that you're a better writer than that. Anyway, all right, let's crack on. Yes, Merry Christmas, everyone, from everybody. By everybody, I mean both of us at Beatles Stuffology. Have a wonderful festive period, right? This is oh god, right? Okay, what do you want to say? What do you want to say about 8 days a week?
oh, right, no. Okay, yeah. So,
I haven't got a smooth transition, and I'm not going to try and invent
no,
one.
it's fine. 8 days a week. Which is, I would imagine, one of those songs that even a lot of people who say they don't know much about the Beatles will be aware of. Although, funny enough, when you start thinking about that list of songs, it ends up becoming a lot larger than a lot of bands' back catalogue. You know, you could almost sort of go to about 20, maybe 30 songs where you'd say, well, I'd expect a significant number of people to at least be aware of that as a song, whether or not they've ever listened to it all the way through. It feels like it's one of those songs that still gets played quite a lot. But I also feel like it's one of those songs that doesn't quite earn its reputation. It sort of has some kind of mythical status as being a classic piece of pop, but then you listen to it again and you think, oh, it's nice. It's you know, it floats delicately, lightly. It's upbeat. It seems to distill everything we think of as being the poppy Beatles sound of, say, 64 and 65. But it is a bit, I would say, empty. I don't want to say vacuous. It's all a little bit about nothing, and I don't know how much substance there is to it. But because for me, it sort of sits in the middle. You know, it's kind of in a clutch of a run of, because it was an American single, it wasn't a UK single. But there's this run of American singles to get to number one. But I also think it kind of sits to the lower end of those in terms of quality. So you've got I Feel Fine in December 64, then you've got 8 Days a Week in actually the spring of 65, Ticket to Ride, Help, Yesterday, and We Can Work It Out. And you sort of think where 8 Days a Week sits in terms of quality up against, say again, I Feel Fine, Ticket to Ride, Help, Yesterday, and We Can Work It Out. And you sort of think, well, it's not quite up there with the rest of those, is it?
No, but it's still it's one of those songs that I really like. I agree with you. I don't think that there's necessarily a huge amount of substance behind it, but it is very charming. It's a very
Yeah.
nice song to listen to. It's a very easy song to play. This is my occasional drop into some chords. But it's basically just like D, E7, G. There's a couple of B minors in there, and that's your lot. It's a very, very simple song, but it's a very simple song that I think is probably done as well as you could do that kind of song. There are I think 7 chords in it roughly, and to write a song with that few chords with that sort of poppy and upbeat and just very charming, I think it's about as good a job as you could probably do with it. It's not a substantial piece of work in any way. And I think for myself, my opinion is somewhere in between yours and theirs, which is to say, I do really like this song. I know neither John Lennon nor Paul McCartney rated it particularly highly, but I don't think they need to be as down on as it is, because I think it's a really good example of this kind of song. But yeah, like you said, like if you want to put it alongside I Feel Fine, if you want to put it alongside something more meaningful like We Can Work It Out, it doesn't really have that kind of weight. So for me, I'm somewhere in the middle there.
Okay, so maybe if I put it in, rather than compare it with the Beatles, what I'll do is yeah, think of it this way: the number one songs in America before and after 8 Days a Week were My Girl and Stop in the Name of Love. And I know My Girl sort of has a bit of a twee reputation. I think we can probably blame Macaulay Culkin for that. Um, but the two of them are, you know, I think genuine stone dead classic pop songs that really kind of speak in an interesting way. And I think that 8 Days a Week kind of sits alongside it, sits alongside those quite nicely, but not quite at the same level. And I think that's worth considering. However, that's not to say that all, because normally I would say at this point it's, you know, it's not a great, it's not one of the best Beatles songs, but it's still a lot better than the other things that people were producing at the time. Well, do you know what? Some people were producing some absolute classics. However, my argument is slightly undermined by the fact that over the following months, the Freddie and the Dreamers had a number one in America, and then Herman's Hermits had number ones in America with Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, and I'm Henry VIII. I'm Henry VIII. I am.
Talk
Which
about one
are
note joke.
yeah. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. So perhaps you didn't have to be absolutely out of the top drawer to hit a number one in America. It also sort of says that maybe the British invasion, was not necessarily the deepest, strongest thing you would ever come across in your life. Now,
Well,
look, okay.
that was the next question I was going to ask you is, do you think, because the two songs that you cited either side of 8 Days a Week are both American and much, much better than
Freddie and the Dreamers.
yes,
I'm telling you now.
as
Yes.
is almost everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, do we think that that's part of it? The fact that the British bands are there simply because they're part of that Mersey Beat thing, they're part of the British invasion, and it really doesn't have much to do qualitatively with the music, but rather what it is that they're representing, which at the time is essentially a movement.
I think it's quite possible that, yeah, and maybe they were representing something that was different that wasn't available in America, just as to a lot of the British beat bands, if you like, that sort of American music of the 50s represented something that wasn't available in the UK. There's always that sort of notion of the other, and in this case, the other as being something that is appealing, as opposed to the way that media likes to make the other something that's scary and daunting. Now, Daily Mail, I'm looking at you. Sue me if I know I'm not going to do that again. Yeah. So I think there is that element. I mean, I think it is noticeable that um, I'm noticeable. I think both of those Herman's Hermit songs were only released in America as singles. Now, you could say yes, but the same applies to 8 Days a Week. But I suspect that's because Herman's Hermits knew that those were music hall songs effectively, and that they wouldn't have the same kind of appeal over here. And yet maybe there was something, uniquely British about them. Remember, when we spoke about A Hard Day's Night, no, it wasn't A Hard Day's Night, was it? I Want to Hold Your Hand. We spoke about the Beatles' appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. Please go back and listen to that episode, because one of the things we spoke about was the fact that amongst the other performers on that show were, oh, look, it's another Monkees reference, Davy Jones in the cast of Oliver. So that was hitting the American market at that time. So there was that kind of like British culture with an element of that sort of music hall kind of style to it, which is, I realise that Lionel Bart's a little bit more than that, but you could see that there's a link in some ways. So maybe the whole package was quite appealing in a way that that is hard for us to think about now. Because I mean, let's face it, we should really start to get in talking about the song itself, and actually we should recognise the fact that I Feel Fine, the previous single in America to 8 Days a Week, and 8 Days a Week itself share something in that they've got innovative. Something wrong with the words today, JG. I'll get them together soon. They have innovative openings with I Feel Fine. There's the feedback element to it. But what we get with 8 Days a Week is, as far as we're aware, the first song to open with a fade in, which is something quite remarkable. And certainly none of those other bands around at the time have the same legacy for attempting things like that. We're certainly not that we're not hitting the top of the charts in the States, for example. So whatever I say about 8 Days a Week, we do need to bear in mind that even within it, there's something special going on, that they're trying stuff, and that perhaps the fact that they seem to, Mark Lewison says this was the first song they took into the studio without being fully realised as a song, meant that they were stuck, and they really had to work out, okay, well, how are we going to open it? How are we going to close it? Because it's innovative, because the opening, the fade in and the end of the song share, a chord sequence, but that doesn't appear anywhere else in the song. So that in itself is an interesting little idea. The fact that you can create this sequence that works with the song, that builds into it and then takes you away from it in the end, but isn't jarring. But then I get slightly worried that the best thing about the song is that fade in and fade out, and the rest of it is all a bit kind of, aren't we all lovely? I love you, you love me, I love you, long time. There you go. Oh, I should write that down. What were the chords on that?
G and C. Let's say, yeah, it's interesting. The other thing that's worth mentioning in terms of the fade in is the fact that this song opens side two. And so when you listen to it on streaming, it's slightly odd to cut from hey, 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 and then you've got this slightly weird fade in. But if you're physically flipping a disc, it feels more. I don't know if logical is the correct word, but it feels like it is part of the experience of listening to it. I know that one of the things that has been said by them is this idea like, oh, you like the music is the music has started before the song does, or it's already going, and then you join it, and it's interesting to see it used that way. And it works in terms of being the opener for side two as well. Again, we finished with Kansas City, hey, 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 on the last side. So we've got a little bit of energy back into the album. And the fade in kind of keeps that going rather than dissipating it. And it's not an awful lot of songs that use fade-ins, and they're often used for sort of dramatic techniques, so like something like "Life During Wartime" on Fear of Music, Talking Heads. That fades in and then fades out, and it's a fairly extended fade in and a fairly extended fade out, because the idea is that kind of we're sort of dramatically dropping into this kind of ongoing thing. So we come in, we get to see a bit of it, it comes out again. That's the function of it.
I believe you'll find the term is in media res. Sorry,
Yes, well, I was trying so hard to avoid saying that. I was really, really working hard not to.
That's the old English teacher in me coming out.
I'm very conscious of BS bingo, so I didn't want to start going.
I don't think we've used in media res before. In fairness,
no, but you always judge me if I drift off into another language, so I was trying not to do that.
Yeah, especially because you would have rolled your R's on res.
Exactly, in media res. So, but anyway, that's not what the fade in is used for here. It's just a way of drawing the listener back in. Here we go. We're kicking off side two. Come join us on this thing, and it's very effective at that for such a simple little thing to be done. Yeah, nobody's ever done it before. It looks obvious now, but it absolutely wasn't in the early '60s. So it's a great little moment, and that's what this song is full of. It isn't a great restatement of anything, but just so many lovely little moments in it, and that's one of them.
Are we assuming with that, though, that they had already decided the track order once they decided on the introduction? Or is it something that perhaps they heard, having done that fade in introduction, thought, oh, that might be good at the start of side two? I don't know if you've looked into anything in relation to that.
As far as I know, I think George Martin was still mostly in control of the track listing,
so.
but they would have more input at this stage, so it would likely be some kind of collaborative thing. But George Martin's not going to miss a trick like that. Simple as that.
No.
Look, here we go. He knows how to structure an album. We've discussed it enough times in the podcast not to have to go into it in great detail here. But he knows how to structure an album, and this is a perfect way to open side two. So I would say it's relatively clear cut.
Fair enough. Yeah, I do kind of get the feeling that Martin was very keen on having a strong opening, and certainly a song that was potentially considered a single in the UK, even though it never was. And I'm sure for some reason, for many years, I thought it was just so familiar that I thought it must have been.
I think everybody makes that assumption about this song because it is so well known. Obviously, the fact that it's helped by the sales in America, but yeah, it's just such a familiar piece of music. And for one that never got played live, it never got dragged out. Like the band were pretty down on it; they thought it was a very slight piece of work. But it's just instantly familiar to everyone.
Yeah, we'll come back to that the live element of it, because there's something interesting related to that I do want to come back to, but I also want to sort of mention that I think something I've shared with you before, JG, is a link to the Stereo Gum column online that
Yeah.
that runs through the American number ones in order, and I keep forgetting to go back in it. Sometimes I vehemently disagree, sometimes I agree, but it's a really interesting sort of cultural look at what was number one in America, and you can sort of see the very significant cultural and even ethnic change to the acts that are selling huge amounts in the mid to late 80s, and then definitely into the 90s as well. Um, and the person that does it sometimes feels like he's a bit down on the Beatles, without particular reason. But I think what he says about 8 days a week is interesting. He says it's a perfectly amiable replacement level early Beatles stuff, which I think is absolutely fine. I mean, he mentions the whole thing about the phrase that McCartney heard from his chauffeur. I don't think we particularly need to. I mean, it's probably covered in other podcasts, I'm sure.
Yeah, we don't need to go down that.
Yeah, Beatles Sort Out or Nothing Is Real. Probably gone into that in great depth and probably vastly more accurately than we ever could. Hi guys, hope you're listening. Um, but he says, so as far as the early Beatles singles go, 8 days a week was quite possibly the flattest. Okay, but compared to almost everything else, everything that anyone else was doing, it's still a banger. It's a slower song than much of what the band was doing at the time, which is interesting. Built on a bright and friendly chug, and sure, the lyric is dumb and simple, and nothing about the song screams genius. But this band was so tuned in to writing pop music that even a lesser effort was full of these effective little touches. The guitar stabs that sound like hand claps. I thought there were hand claps on it, never mind. The warm and gooey bass tone, the way those harmonies hit on the chorus. The Beatles would go on to do better, but they'd go on to do worse too. I think that's a fairly accurate summary of the song. You know, it's not top level Beatles, but it's still pretty darn good.
Right, firstly, there are hand claps on the song, but I think what he means is that there's syncopated guitars on it, so the guitar like so dum cha 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 cha, so it's not just a straightforward rhythm play. I think that's what that's referring to, but there are definitely hand claps
There's
in the
definitely
song.
hand claps, yeah. I'd be a bit worried about that otherwise. And you know the harmonies, but particularly on that, you know, on the words 8 days a week, is pretty effective.
Yeah, and the fact that the instruments stop on that 8 days a week, I love you, pause, da dum, and then back into it again. So there's tension.
I don't like that so much. Yeah,
there's good tension being built there. Other sort of point I want to make, just before we move on from it, in terms of the familiarity of this song, is that it's on One. And One is the biggest selling album of the 2000s. So there's a massive exposure to it in a way that isn't necessarily all that visible, I guess. But yeah, it's as you pointed out, it's squeezed in between I Feel Fine and Ticket to Ride. So that also really helps to push its visibility in a way that kind of, you know, gets over that fact that it was never a single in the UK. There are other sources for it to be that. I can't remember. Is it the Red and Blue albums as well? I probably should have looked that up. I'm going to do it right now. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to do a quick live. I should know this, right? That's terrible. Yeah, it's on the original Red album. Yeah. So that's another. Those albums sold, you know, a bajillion copies or something, and so that's another way that people will come to the song, way apart from you know its native album.
I find that interesting because I've never owned the Red or Blue. I didn't buy one, and as I've said before, around the time of Anthology, I was not really. I wasn't really watching much television, quite frankly. So I've never seen the series, but also I wasn't buying that sort of music at the time. And the only Beatles compilations I can remember having were the oldies but goodies, might have been on that, I suppose, and Hey Jude, which I had on cassette with the hilariously hairy pictures on the front. So it's interesting that it's wormed its way into my consciousness as well. Perhaps I've just listened to a bit too much. AM radio.
It's always possible. A hasty Bing, as I am wont to do, tells me that it's not on Oldies but Goldies.
Okay, okay, fair enough. Lord knows where I've got all that from then.
I have no idea. I'm unable to help you on that one.
Yeah.
It is interesting. The anthology version of this is kind of passingly interesting. It's taken at a slightly slower pace, and McCartney's walking bass line is much more prominent in the anthology version,
Hmm.
and what do you call it? The chorus is slightly different as well. So it's kind of an interesting version. It's
Okay.
not. I wouldn't go so far as to use the word indispensable, but it's interesting simply in the sense that you see the evolution of the song. The anthology version is interesting for being a bit slower, but it's a bit plodding, and I don't think that's just kind of familiarity bias. I think it doesn't quite have the same sparkle to it when it's taken at a slightly slower pace. Speeding it up, which again almost certainly be a George Martin thing, helps to like breathe life into it. It gives it that extra little dimension that the song needs to kind of get it across the line. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, but it's not the most essential cut from anthology.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. I'll maybe have a little look and see what I can find. I suppose the other reason you mentioned exposure earlier, which is probably a good time to mention Ron Howard. Now, before his lawyers also get in touch, I should probably just sort of mention the fact that the extra exposure that the name of the song brought because of Ron Howard's documentary about the Beatles touring years called 8 Days a Week, because they toured quite a lot. Well, perhaps not quite as much as you might think, but however, they did tour a lot. But it just seems so odd that although it's a really handy phrase, that they were allowed to call it that, bearing in mind there is only, as far as I'm aware, one live recording of or one live performance of 8 Days a Week, and that was on the ITV TV program Thank You Lucky Stars in March 1965. So it just seems really, really odd. And to compound that, the official Beatles YouTube channel has a video, an official video of the song, which I'm presuming was designed to support and promote the film, because it uses a lot of that very obvious footage from the last couple of Beatles tours in America. So walking out at Shea Stadium, walking out at Candlestick Park, and that sort of thing. It just seems like a really odd thing to have done. It's almost as though just because it's one of those quirky phrases, like, a hard day's night, that it kind of lives in the memory because of that. And therefore it's distinct. Everybody knows it, so we'll use it, even though it's stunningly inappropriate because they didn't play it live.
What do you think of that Ron Howard film?
I thought it was a bit dull. But then I look back on some of those films that try and cover a lot in one go
Mm.
as being a bit odd. There was a Nick Brumfield film about Brian Jones that was shown on British TV a few months ago, and it got some absolute rave reviews. And yet I watched it, and after about 25 minutes or so, I just got really irritated by the storytelling and the fact that um, the pictures didn't match the hyperbole of Nick Broomfield or any of the contributors. And it's not, if you're going to say that there was a riot every time the Rolling Stones played on stage, well, can we have something that proves that? Let's have some newspaper headlines, or let's have, if there's any footage. Don't just keep showing the one particular clip where someone runs on stage and someone else is doing something a bit naughty, and it's clearly not even the gig that you're talking about. So, and yeah, I think sometimes little things like that kind of throw me out of it. And I guess it's a little too polished, it's a little too nice, and I didn't really feel as though it was aimed at someone who knows more than a passing amount about the Beatles. So, again, it's like, who's it for? I don't understand who it's for.
That's exactly what my reaction to it was. I didn't really understand who it was for, and I didn't really understand what it existed for. It other than for the sake of it. It's really very ordinary.
Mm.
It repeats a lot of very familiar material, like exactly like you were saying with the video, like a lot of very familiar shots, and it's just really rather dull. It just doesn't have anything. It doesn't add anything. I think that's the thing. It feels more like a work of filing than it does a work of cinema. It's just like, all right, well, we've got all this stuff in one place, so that's great. Now you can see it all in one place. Next, it's not adding to the sum total of Beatles knowledge. It's not a new look at the material. It's not getting, McCartney or Ringo to say something new about it. They just trot out the same old cliches about how hard it was and the Philippines and I'm not a Beatle anymore and all this kind of stuff. It's just the same old kind of tick box storytelling. It's just really rather ordinary.
Rather ordinary. It's not quite my summation of the song, but we're almost there with that. There is, by the way, a really confusing release history for this song because, of course, it was on Beatles for Sale in the UK late '64. It was on American single released in February '65, and it was also on the Beatles' sixth VI, to use my old Roman Latin expertise there, album in America in '65, along with half of the Beatles for Sale that didn't make it onto the Beatles '65 album, which was actually released in 1964. Have you got that? Is that all clear?
I think that all makes absolutely sod all sense. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, we'll be out with the in-laws in the good old US of A for Christmas. Actually, by the time you hear this episode, we might even be on the way, I think. And he's got some of those albums, and looking at the father-in-law's record collection last year and thinking, my God, they screwed up the Beatles albums in America really quite badly.
Oh yes,
yeah, yeah. I think the only one they might have got right was Magical Mystery Tour, but that's a story for 2027 possibly. We'll see. We'll get there eventually. We'll get there eventually. It also applies to the end of Beatles for Sale. But we're one song closer and we're into side 2. Whee! Do you say side 2 or side B? Why is it A side and B side for a single, but side 1, side 2 for an album?
I'm unable to answer that question. But
Okay,
that's
good.
question.
Let's move on.
Okay, right, fine. Shall we give this a score and draw things to a conclusion?
Yeah, see. I'm going to have to look up the spreadsheet at this point.
Oh, okay. So,
So, man, Googles. Yeah. Anyway, you talk about it, and while you're talking, I promise I'll listen, and then I'll tell you what I think.
That's a very kind offer. I'm going to be quite generous with this one. I'm going to give it a 7. I think it's just a nice little song. I really like it. I really enjoy playing it, which I must be honest colors my opinion of it. It's got a really lovely little McCartney bass line, which we haven't talked about, but it's really good. And I just really like this song. I don't have any more sort of depth of insight than that. It's sometimes you just kind of like something, and this is kind of one of those.
Okay, so looking at the spreadsheet, I Feel Fine was a 7. Let's see, things we said today was an 8. And I Love Her, I gave 7 to. I Should Have Known Better was a 7. Hard Day's Night, I can't put it alongside Hard Day's Night. I think that's the problem, or I Feel Fine. I think I'm quite happy to sit it alongside things like I see that I'm putting alongside Kansas City. All right, okay, just say 6 and be done with it.
6. Okay.
Yeah.
See, if only you used half points, then you could have given it 6.5, and then you'd be slightly better than Kansas City, but not quite full on Hard Day's Night. But you restrict yourself in the ways that work for you. That's all.
Well, you decided this bleeding score system, and you
right.
wanted it,
I still do.
Nothing to do with it, but we leave that sort of thing to the good guys at Big Beatles Sort Out with their really bizarre. Hello again, Big Beatles Sort Out. I do like your podcast, but I wish you'd explain your scoring system at some point. It was quite funny listening to their Now and Then episode, where it just said, "Oh, in production, I'll give it, I don't know, 83." Think, okay, what does that mean? I mean, 83 out of 100. How does that compare? What did you give this song or that song? But even they will admit that they've hampered themselves with their scoring system, and they do theirs out of 100. We do ours out of 10. Makes no sense.
Good. The less sense it makes, the happier I am. Right. Too bad. You can really get a hold of us. We hope that you will. It's been lovely to have a little bit of listener correspondence over the last couple of episodes. So if you would like to, you can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter for reasons that I don't really understand anymore, at Beatles_ology, and we are Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. Please also check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert, which would be me, go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find the show. We carry on with side 2 of Beatles for Sale next episode with Words of Love. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.